The word left my mouth like thunder born from the depths of the earth. Knees. And they obeyed. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a plea. It was a command that sliced through the air like an invisible blade. And I saw, with eyes that now shone like liquid silver mirrors, every wolf in that hall forced to the ground. Nobles in velvet and silk, warriors in polished armor, lords who had never bowed to anyone. All of them fell. Their knees struck the cold stone with a collective crash that echoed up to the ceiling rafters. Kieran Gore, the man who had bought me like cattle, tried to resist. I heard his bones snap. The scream that tore from him was music to something wild now living inside me, something that had slept for 22 years beneath layers of poison and fear and servitude. My wolf, my crown, my true self. I took a step forward, and the mithril chainmail covering my silk gown chimed softly, 1,000 stars captured in metal. My hands, which weeks ago were still bleeding from scrubbing stone floors, were now healed. Strong. Dangerous. My father, Lord Sigmund, was on his knees before me. His liquor-red face had paled to a sickly gray. He looked at me as if I were a ghost, a nightmare. Anything but the daughter he had sold for 2,000 gold on a rainy afternoon. And behind me, solid as a mountain of black steel, I felt Acheron's presence. My alpha. My king. The man who had looked at a mud-caked slave in a rusty cage and seen a queen. His voice reached me, low and warm as an ember. Show them, my soul. Show them who you always were. And I showed them. If you want to know how I, a servant who scrubbed floors on her knees, became the woman capable of making kings kneel with a single word, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you are listening to my story from. Come with me, because this journey from ash to crown is mine, but now it is yours too. But for you to understand this moment, to feel the weight of every word that left my mouth in that hall, you need to go back with me to the beginning, to the dungeon I called home, to the night my own sisters signed my sentence, to the day I discovered my blood was worth gold. The cold of Vance Keep had a taste. It tasted of damp stone, ancient mold, and tears swallowed before anyone could see. I knew every nuance of that cold. I knew the especially cruel bite it reserved for winter dawns, when I woke before the sun to light the hearths that would warm rooms where I never slept. I knew the way it seeped through the holes in my sheepskin boots, turning my toes into numb stones that I could barely feel while scrubbing the floor. And that morning, kneeling in the great hall with a hard-bristled brush in my calloused hands, I met a new variation of that cold. The kind that came from within, the kind that whispered that something terrible was about to happen. My breath escaped in small clouds of vapor as I worked. The sound of the bristles against the stone was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Scrape, scrub, scrape, scrub. The same movement I had been making since I was 6 years old, when my mother died and my father decided I was more useful as a servant than as a daughter. My mother's hands were soft. I remembered sometimes. She would run her fingers through my hair and sing songs about wolves dancing beneath the moon. I tried to recall her voice, the exact melody, but the years had worn away the memory like water wears away stone. All that remained was a vague sense of warmth, of safety, things I hadn't felt in a very long time. The hall door burst open. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. The smell of sour wine and rancid sweat that preceded my father was unmistakable. Lord Sigmund Vance, lord of these decadent lands, whose only talent was turning gold into debt and debt into problems for everyone around him. Get up, rat. I kept scrubbing, not out of defiance. Defiance was a luxury I couldn't afford, but because I had learned that answering too quickly meant seeming anxious, and seeming anxious meant giving him power over me. I said, get up. The bucket of dirty water beside me was kicked hard. The icy water splashed onto my legs, soaking the gray linen tunic that was my second skin. The cold bit my flesh like small, cruel teeth. I stood up. Sigmund glared at me with those bloodshot eyes I knew so well. He was worse than usual. His red, swollen face gleamed with sweat despite the cold. His thin, oily hair was plastered to his forehead, and there was something in his gaze. Something that made me involuntarily take a step back. Anticipation. I have visitors, he said, a twisted smile curving his cracked lips. Important visitors. You will behave. It wasn't a question. It was an order. Before I could answer, the hall doors opened again, and the scent that wafted in made my stomach turn. Dried blood, untanned hide, something rotten beneath it all, like meat left too long in the sun. Kieran Gore. I had heard stories about him. Everyone had. The leader of the Black Throat Pack, a group of renegade wolves who operated on the edges of the kingdom, dealing in everything forbidden. Slaves, poisons, souls. He was bigger than the story suggested. A mountain of muscle and scars, his skin covered in keloids that formed grotesque tribal patterns. Gold teeth gleamed at the front of his mouth when he smiled, a smile that was nothing human. 2 warriors flanked him, both nearly as large as he was, with the dead eyes of predators. "So," Kieran said, his voice a low thunder that vibrated off the stone walls. "This is the merchandise?" Merchandise. The word echoed in my head like a funeral bell. Sigmund performed an exaggerated bow, the clumsy movement of a drunkard trying to look sober. "My 3rd daughter, Lord Gore, Dahlia. 22 years old, healthy, obedient. Obedient." I almost laughed, but the laughter died in my throat as Kieran began to walk toward me. Each step made the floor tremble. I wanted to run, every instinct in my body screaming to move, but my legs felt stuck in quicksand. He stopped in front of me, so close I could see the enlarged pores on his scarred skin, the red veins in his jaundiced eyes. And then he grabbed my chin. His fingers were like iron claws, rough and ruthless. He turned my face to the left, then to the right, as if I were a horse at auction, as if I were nothing but flesh and bone to be appraised. "Good teeth," he mumbled, more to himself than anyone else. Hips wide enough. I forced myself not to vomit. 2,000 gold, Kieran finally said, releasing my chin with a shove that made me stumble. Not a coin more. "Done," Sigmund said immediately. Too fast. He had accepted too fast, which meant he was desperate. More desperate than I had imagined. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I registered my sisters, Samara and Lariel, peering through the side door. Their garishly colored dresses, yellow and shocking pink, so unsuitable for the austerity of winter, looked like splotches of paint on a gray canvas. They whispered amongst themselves, looking at me with something I recognized as satisfaction. They knew. They always knew. Kieran gestured to one of his men, who tossed a leather pouch at Sigmund's feet. The coins jingled when it hit the floor. My father bent to scoop it up with an eagerness that filled me with disgust. 2,000 gold. That was it. That was my price. "Tie her up," Kieran ordered. One of his warriors advanced with a thick rope in his hands, and something inside me, something I didn't know existed, finally awoke. It wasn't thought. It was instinct, pure and primal. My hand plunged into my apron pocket before my brain could process the movement. My fingers found the small linen pouch I had carried for years, a bag full of fireroot I had stolen from the kitchen and kept for emergencies. Emergencies like this one. I pulled out the red powder and blew. Kieran roared. The sound was animalistic, born of pain I hoped was unbearable. He covered his eyes with his massive hands, tears streaming between his fingers as the caustic powder did its work, and I ran. I didn't think of direction or strategy. I just ran. My bare feet pounded on the cold stone, then the wood of the hallway, then the icy mud of the outer courtyard. The freezing air burned my lungs as I sprinted across the open space toward the gate. Freedom. It was so close. So incredibly close. The rope snare fell over my shoulders like a snake. I fell face first into the mud. The impact knocked the air from my lungs. I tried to get up, tried to tear the rope away, but it only tightened more with every movement. And then I was being dragged, mud filling my mouth and my ears and my eyes, the world reduced to a brown blur of humiliation. When they finally stopped dragging me, I was at the foot of a cart. Rusted iron bars formed a cage too small for an animal, much less a person. Kieran stood beside it, his eyes still red and watering, his expression pure fury. He crouched down until his face was level with mine. "You will pay for that in bed, rat," he whispered. "Every night until I tire of you. And I never tire." He threw me inside the cage as if I were a sack of potatoes. My body slammed against the bars on the other side, pain exploding in my ribs. The rusted padlock clicked shut. sounding like a death sentence. And as the cart began to move, rattling down the dirt road that led away from everything I knew, I looked back one last time. Sigmund was counting the coins. Samara and Lyriel were laughing. And I, Dahlia Vance, the sold daughter, the disposable servant, the nobody with dull eyes and cracked hands, closed my eyes and did the only thing left to me. I planned. Because if I was going to die, I was going to die fighting. And if by some miracle I survived, I was going to make every single one of them pay. With blood. The rain began at dusk. It wasn't a gentle rain, the kind that washes the world and leaves everything cleaner. It was a winter rain, icy and cruel, falling in curtains so thick I could barely see the forest passing around the cart. Every drop was an ice needle piercing my skin, soaking the thin tunic that was already heavy with mud. I was trembling so hard that my teeth chattered audibly even over the sound of the storm. The cage was too small for me to lie down completely, too small to stand up in. I was curled in a corner, my knees against my chest, my arms wrapped around my body in a useless attempt to preserve any remaining warmth. Kieran rode ahead, seemingly immune to the cold. Every now and then he looked back, and even in the darkness of the storm, I could see the golden gleam of his eyes. Wolf eyes, predator eyes. Eyes that promised things I didn't want to imagine. I had stopped planning escape a few hours ago, not out of surrender but out of pragmatism. The cage bars were solid iron, too thick to break. The padlock was heavy and rusty, but sturdy. And even if I managed to get out, where would I go? We were in the middle of a forest I didn't know, surrounded by wolves who would hunt me for sport. So I waited. Waiting was something I knew how to do very well. The road began to climb, winding among increasingly ancient trees. The forest here was different, darker, denser, with trunks so thick it would take 10 men holding hands to circle them. There was something primal about that place, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. And then the cart stopped. I lifted my head, trying to see through the curtain of rain. Kieran had stopped his horse. So had his men. They were all looking ahead, at something I couldn't see. "What is it?" one of the warriors asked, his voice tense. "Silence," Kieran growled. I crawled to the front of the cage, my frozen fingers closing around the bars, and then I saw. A wall of riders blocked the road. 10 figures mounted on war horses, still as statues beneath the storm. Their armor was so profoundly black, it seemed to absorb the little light that remained, and even from a distance, I could see runes etched into the metal. Runes that glowed with a soft gold, pulsing like heartbeats. Royal knights. I had heard stories about them, too. The personal guard of the Iron King, the supreme alpha who ruled all the northern packs. They said they were chosen at birth, trained since they could walk, transformed into living weapons who knew neither fear nor pity. But what made me hold my breath wasn't the knights. It was the man in the center. He rode a different horse from the others. Larger, blacker, if that was possible. And from the animal's nostrils came vapor that glowed with a reddish hue, as if fire was burning inside it. A nightmare. I had read about them in ancient books my mother kept. Horses born of old magic, ridden only by the most powerful alphas. And the man riding it could only be one. Acheron Draven, the Iron King. Even from afar, even through the rain, I could feel the power emanating from him. It wasn't something visible, not exactly. It was more a pressure in the air, a vibration that made my bones resonate in a strange and not entirely unpleasant way. He was large, bigger than Kieran, which I hadn't thought possible. The black plate armor covered a body that was pure warrior musculature, and over his shoulders rested a cloak made from the hide of a giant wolf, black as night, that rippled in the rain as if it were still alive. His hair was dark and long, tied back in a warrior style that left his face exposed. A face of hard angles, a square jaw, and a thin white scar that crossed from his left cheekbone to his jawline. And the eyes, even at that distance, I could see the eyes. Molten gold, liquid amber with rings of fire. They were fixed on me. A smaller man, wearing scribal robes beneath a drenched cloak, rode forward. He unrolled a parchment that somehow remained dry, and began to read in a voice that cut through the storm. "Lord Gore, you are crossing royal territory with undeclared cargo. According to the Iron Edict, paragraph 7, section 3, "She's my slave," Kieran interrupted. "I bought her legally." The words seemed to echo in the silence that followed. The scribe looked at the parchment, then at Kieran, then at the king. Acheron said nothing. He simply dismounted. The movement was fluid, almost lazy, as if he had all the time in the world. His feet, clad in black leather boots, sank into the mud of the road without him seeming to notice. And then he began to walk. Toward me. Each step he took increased the pressure in the air. I could feel my heart beating faster, my breathing becoming shallow, something inside me stirring in a way I didn't understand. Kieran moved to block the way. For all his madness, I couldn't tell if that was courage or stupidity. "With due respect, Your Majesty," he said, his voice strained. "This merchandise was purchased legally. You have no jurisdiction over private transactions." Acheron stopped. For a long moment he just stared at Kieran. The silence stretched, charged with something electrical, something dangerous. I saw Kieran's warriors instinctively back away, their inner wolves recognizing a predator far above them in the food chain. And then Acheron spoke. His voice was unexpected. Not a shout, not a growl, just words, low and controlled, that somehow cut through the storm as if the rain didn't exist. "Get out of my way." 3 words. Simple. Deadly. Kieran hesitated. I saw the conflict on his face, pride warring against the instinct for survival. For a second, I thought he was going to resist, that he was going to do something stupid. But he wasn't completely an idiot. Slowly, with a stiffness that spoke of swallowed humiliation, Kieran stepped aside. Acheron kept walking. His scent hit me before he reached the cage. It wasn't what I expected, not the smell of blood and war that accompanied Kieran. It was something completely different. Ozone, cold metal, the air before a lightning storm, and beneath it all, something more, something that made every cell in my body vibrate at an unknown frequency. He stopped in front of the cage. Up close, he was even more intimidating. The scar on his face gleamed white against his tanned skin. His short sculpted beard framed lips that looked like they had never smiled. And those eyes, those impossible molten gold eyes, were fixed on mine with an intensity that made me forget how to breathe. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The rain fell around us, but it seemed distant now, belonging to a different world from the small universe that had formed between us. And then, something happened. The runes on his armor, those golden lines etched into the black metal, began to glow more intensely. The light pulsed at the same rhythm as something I took a second to recognize. My heart. The runes were pulsing to the rhythm of my heart. Acheron raised his gauntleted hand and touched the cage bars. The metal groaned. It bent. And then, with a tearing sound that seemed impossible, he simply ripped the cage door off. He didn't unlock it. He ripped it off. Solid iron, bending like paper in his hands. Kieran made a sound of protest, but a look from the king silenced him. Acheron reached his arms inside the cage. Toward me. I should have recoiled. I should have been afraid. This man was the supreme alpha, the Iron King, the most powerful being I would ever encounter. I was a mud-caked servant, a slave bought for 2,000 gold, a nobody. But when his hands found me, when his arms lifted me from the cage, as if I weighed nothing, I didn't feel fear. I felt something much worse. Recognition. He carried me like a bride. My soaked and filthy body against his black armor, staining the polished metal with mud and dried blood from wounds I hadn't even noticed I had. But he didn't seem to care. He didn't even look at the grime. He only looked at me. "You are not a slave," he said, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "You are soul." I didn't understand. The words made no sense. Soul? What did that mean? But before I could ask, before I could do anything, he turned and began walking back toward the nightmare. The scribe approached, looking confused. "Your Majesty, what shall we do with Gore and his men?" Acheron did not stop walking. "Arrest them for trafficking in royal territory," he said. "The trial will be at the solstice." Kieran finally found his voice. "This is outrageous. This woman is my property. I paid for her." Acheron stopped. Slowly, still holding me against his chest, he turned to face Kieran, and when he spoke, his voice had changed. It was no longer the controlled tone from before. It was something deeper, older, something that was not entirely human. "She is my mate," he said, "my soulmate, and you caged her like an animal." The air seemed to freeze around us. I saw Kieran blanch, all the blood draining from his scarred face. "Your Majesty," he stammered. "I didn't know. How could I have known?" "You should have smelled it," Acheron said, and there was something terrifying in his calmness. Any wolf with a shred of instinct would have felt her power, but you were too busy thinking about what you would do with her in your bed. The last words came out as a snarl, and I felt, for one terrifying second, Acheron's control waver. The pressure in the air increased exponentially. The nightmare whinnied, the flames in its nostrils glowing brighter. The royal knights reached for their swords, but then Acheron's eyes met mine, and whatever he saw, there was enough to bring him back. The pressure subsided. The storm seemed to calm. "Take him," Acheron said to the knights, his voice controlled again. "And if he resists, cut off the hands that dared to touch her." I should have felt satisfaction. I should have felt revenge. But all I felt was exhaustion. And buried beneath layers of fear and confusion and cold, something I couldn't name. Something that had to do with the warmth of his body against mine, with the smell of storm and metal, with the way his heart beat at the same impossible rhythm as the runes on his armor, at the same rhythm as mine. As he settled me on the nightmare's saddle and mounted behind me, as the horse began to gallop through the forest toward an unknown destination, I allowed myself one last look back. Kieran was being dragged from his horse, and for the first time since he had grabbed my chin in Vance Keep's hall, I saw fear in his eyes, the same fear I should have been feeling, but I wasn't. Because something inside me, something I didn't know existed, had finally woken up, and it was purring. The Iron Citadel was a mountain transformed into a fortress. I first saw it as a shadow on the horizon, a black mass silhouetted against the sky that still wept the last remnants of the storm. But as the nightmare galloped closer, the details emerged from the fog like a dream, turning into reality. Towers that pierced the clouds. Walls so thick they seemed to grow from the rock itself. And everywhere, carved into the black stone, the same golden runes that glowed on Acheron's armor. I had never seen anything so immense, so ancient, so terrifyingly beautiful. "You are shaking," Acheron's voice said behind me, his chest a wall of warmth against my back. "Cold," I replied automatically. It was a lie. I had stopped feeling cold some time ago, enveloped in the wolf-hide cloak he had placed over my shoulders at some point during the ride. The trembling was something else. Fear, perhaps, or exhaustion finally taking its toll, or that strange thing that had awakened inside me and was now stirring like a caged animal, responding to his proximity in ways I didn't understand. The citadel gates opened before we reached them. Guards in black armor bowed as we passed. Servants ran ahead, carrying torches that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. And on every face I saw, in every pair of eyes that met mine, there was the same expression: amazement, as if I were something impossible, something that shouldn't exist. Acheron dismounted first, then took me by the waist and lifted me down from the horse as if I weighed no more than a feather. My legs almost gave way when my feet touched the stone floor, but his arms held me steady. "Can you walk?" he asked. There was no condescension in his voice. It was genuine concern. And that, more than anything else, made me want to cry. "I'm fine," I lied again. He didn't seem to believe it, but he didn't argue. Instead, he kept a hand at the base of my back as he guided me into the citadel, upstairs and through corridors I could never hope to memorize, until we reached a double door of black oak with gold handles. The king's quarters. I knew before I even entered. I knew by the way the guards stepped away, by the way Acheron pushed the doors himself instead of waiting for someone else to do it, by the way the air changed as we crossed the threshold, becoming warmer, more intimate, more dangerous. The room was immense. A giant fireplace took up an entire wall, the flames crackling with an intensity that cast dancing shadows across the space. White fur rugs covered the stone floor, and in the center of it all, a black canopy bed with silk sheets that gleamed like still water. 3 servants waited near the fireplace. Young, pretty, dressed in discreet uniforms of gray and silver. They bowed when we entered, their eyes lowered in deference. "Prepare the bath," Acheron ordered. "Bring food. Clean clothes." "Yes, Your Majesty," they replied in unison, beginning to move. But when one of them approached me, her hand outstretched to help with the muddy cloak, Acheron made a low sound in his throat. A growl. The servant froze, her eyes wide with terror. "Leave," Acheron said, his voice deeper than before. "All of you. Now." They fled. There was no other word to describe the speed with which the three disappeared through the door, leaving me alone with the Iron King. The silence that followed was deafening. "You scared them," I said, because apparently my mouth hadn't received the memo that it was time to be quiet. Acheron looked at me. His molten gold eyes shone with something I couldn't identify. "I don't want other hands on you," he said simply. "Not yet." I should have protested. I should have reminded him that I was a stranger, a servant, a nobody, that I didn't belong to him just because his runes had decided to glow when he touched me. But the words died in my throat when he moved. Acheron walked to a dark wooden table where a basin of steaming water waited. He dipped a white towel into the water, wrung out the excess, and returned to me. And then, with a gentleness I didn't expect from hands that had ripped an iron door from its hinges, he began to clean my face. The towel was warm, soft, and his touch, despite the size of his hands, was incredibly delicate. He wiped the dried mud from my forehead, my cheeks, my chin. He cleaned the blood that had dried at the corner of my mouth. He wiped away the tears I hadn't even known I'd shed. And the whole time, those impossible eyes never left mine. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered. "Because no one should have made you feel so dirty that you needed someone else to wash you," he replied. "But also because I am selfish, and I want to be the first to see your true face." My heart stumbled. He continued cleaning, moving to my neck, my ears, my hairline. The water in the basin grew darker and darker, washing away years of neglect and abuse. And when he finally stopped, when he stepped back to get a better look at me, I realized he was smiling. It wasn't a large smile. It was barely a curve of the lips. But it was there. "There," he said softly. "There you are." Before I could answer, a knock sounded at the door. Acheron sighed, the irritation clear in every line of his body. "What is it?" The door opened, and a man entered. Old, stooped, wearing purple robes stained with substances I preferred not to identify. He carried a worn leather satchel and had eyes that gleamed with sharp intelligence behind thick glasses. "Your Majesty," he said, making a bow that cracked his back. I came as fast as I could. "Dr. Aldrich," Acheron said. "Examine her." The old alchemist approached me, his head tilted like a curious bird. He took my hand without asking permission, turning it over to examine the palm, the fingers, the scars. He murmured. "Severe malnutrition. Those cracks are from cold and heavy labor. But that's not what you want to know, is it, Your Majesty?" Acheron didn't reply. He didn't need to. The alchemist released my hand and opened his satchel, pulling out a small glass vial and a silver needle. "I need blood," he said to me. "Just 1 drop." I extended my hand before I could think twice. The prick was quick, almost painless. A drop of dark red blood fell into the vial, and Aldrich immediately mixed it with a clear liquid from another container. And then the potion boiled. Not gently, like water over a fire. Violently, the liquid bubbled and foamed, climbing the sides of the glass, changing color, clear to red, red to purple, purple to black, black as a starless night. Aldrich nearly dropped the vial. "By all the ancient gods," he whispered, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "Black aconite. A daily dose, I would say. Perhaps more. For," he paused, calculating, "for at least 16 years. The sound that tore from Acheron wasn't human. It was a growl so deep I felt it vibrate in my chest, so heavy with fury that the air around him seemed to ripple. I saw him clench his fists, saw the muscles in his arms contract beneath the armor, saw the scar on his face turn white as the blood fled his skin, and then he picked up a metal chalice that sat on the nearby table, and squeezed. The metal groaned, it bent, it compacted beneath his fingers as if it were made of clay instead of steel. When he finally opened his hand, What had been a chalice was now a distorted ball of crumpled metal. "They kept her weak," he said, every word a shard of ice. "They poisoned my soul to sell her like cattle." I didn't understand. My mind was working slowly, processing information that made no sense. "Black aconite?" I asked. I never took poison." Aldrich cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "You did, my lady. Likely in your food or drink, since childhood. Black aconite is known for suppressing certain abilities in wolves." "I am not a wolf," I said. The silence that followed was deafening. Aldrich looked at Acheron. Acheron looked at me, and I saw, on his face, something that looked like pity. "You are," he said gently. "You always were. But they kept you so drugged that your wolf never managed to emerge." The words hit my brain but refused to make sense. Me, a wolf, the whole time. "They knew," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. My father, my sisters, they knew what I was. That's why my mother protected me. That's why she... My voice broke. Acheron took a step toward me, but I pulled away. "All this time," I said, my voice rising, "all this time I thought I was defective, that there was something wrong with me. I couldn't scent like the others, couldn't transform, couldn't feel anything a wolf was supposed to feel, and it was because they were poisoning me." Tears came before I could stop them. Not tears of sadness, tears of fury. 16 years, I said. 16 years living as a servant in my own home, scrubbing floors, sleeping in the cold, being treated worse than the hunting dogs. And the whole time they knew I was a wolf, an equal, and they poisoned me so they could sell me. Acheron moved so fast I barely saw him. One instant, I was alone in the middle of the room. The next, I was in his arms, my face pressed against his black armor, sobs shaking my entire body. And he said nothing. He didn't try to calm me. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He just held me, one hand on my back, the other on the back of my neck, while I poured 16 years of pain out onto his chest. The fire crackled in the hearth. Somewhere in the citadel, a wolf howled at the rising moon. And when I finally stopped crying, when the sobs turned to tremors and the tremors turned to silence, I heard Acheron's voice, low and relentless as the metal that named his throne. "Aldrich," he said, "how long to clear the poison from her system?" "Weeks, your majesty," the alchemist replied. "Maybe a month. The aconite is ingrained in her bones. It will be painful. Then you will make it as painless as possible." Acheron pulled back enough to look into my eyes, his thumbs wiping the tear tracks from my cheeks. "And when she is healed, when her wolf awakens completely, we will hold the solstice decree." "Solstice decree?" I asked. Aldrich choked. "Your Majesty, the solstice is in 3 weeks. The law requires all pack lords to be present, including Sigmund Vance," Acheron finished, a smile that was anything but gentle curving his lips. "And his precious daughters. Finally, I began to understand. You're going to present me," I said slowly. "As your soul, as my queen," he corrected, "in front of everyone who scorned you, everyone who hurt you, everyone who sold you as meat." His eyes glowed more intensely. "And then you will decide their punishment." I should have felt fear. I should have felt overwhelmed, confused, lost. But when I looked into those molten gold eyes, when I felt his warmth enveloping me like a promise, all I felt was something I hadn't experienced since my mother died. Hope. And buried beneath it, something wilder, hungrier, something that, for the first time in 16 years, was starting to wake up. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life, and also the most marvelous. Aldrich hadn't lied about the pain. Each day brought a new purging session, bitter potions that burned my throat and made me sweat black poison from my pores. Nights of fever where I woke up screaming, my body fighting 16 years of aconite ingrained in my bones. Mornings when I could barely lift myself from bed, so weak I needed help to eat. But each day also brought Acheron. He was there when I woke from the nightmares, sitting in the chair beside my bed like an iron sentinel. He was there when the fevers consumed me, holding my hand with those fingers that could bend metal, yet touched me as if I were made of glass. He was there when I cried from frustration, when my body refused to cooperate, when I wanted to give up on everything. And he never said it would be easy. He never promised the pain would pass quickly. He just stayed. "You don't have to do this," I said one night, my voice hoarse from so much vomiting. "You are the king. You must have more important things to do than look after a sick servant." Acheron lifted his eyes from the report he was reading, the firelight dancing on the hard lines of his face. "You are not a servant," he said simply, "and there is nothing more important." Then he returned to reading as if he hadn't just turned my world upside down. The worst passed in the 3rd week. I woke up one morning and realized the pain had subsided, that my muscles didn't protest when I moved, that the fog that had covered my mind for so long was finally dissipating, and that I could sense things I had never sensed before. The scent of fire in the hearth, oak wood and pine resin, the sound of the guards' hearts in the corridor, beating at different rhythms, the touch of the air on my skin, every draft carrying information about temperature and humidity, and something more, something I could only describe as emotion, and above all, his scent, Acheron, metal and ozone and ancient power. But now I could sense the layers beneath, cedar, tanned leather, and something warm and musky that made my stomach clench in a way that had nothing to do with nausea. "Get up," his voice said from the bedroom door. "It's time to train." I turned, confused. Train? Acheron was leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest, dressed in simple training clothes instead of his usual armor. The sight of him without all that metal was almost more intimidating. Every muscle in his body was visible beneath the black linen tunic, every scar a story I didn't yet know. "You are going to be presented as my queen in 1 week," he said. "That means you need to know how to defend yourself." I sat up in bed, my eyebrows furrowed. Defend myself from what? Isn't that what guards are for? Guards can be bribed. They can be distracted. They can fail. But you? He took a step into the room, his eyes shining with that gold I was beginning to love. "You will never depend on anyone for your own safety. Not if I can help it." There was something behind his words. A story. A pain. But before I could ask, he tossed something toward me. I caught it by reflex, my fingers closing around soft leather. "Training clothes," he said. "Get dressed. I'll meet you in the courtyard in 10 minutes. And then he was gone. The training courtyard was at the back of the citadel, a wide space covered in fresh snow that gleamed beneath the winter sun. Weapons of all kinds lined the walls, swords and spears and axes and things I couldn't even name. I stood in the center, dressed in the clothes Acheron had given me, soft leather pants and a fitted tunic that allowed movement, and I was absolutely terrified. Acheron circled around me like a wolf assessing its prey. "Stance," he said, feet shoulder-width apart, knees bent, center of gravity low. I tried to obey. My feet trembled in the snow. He stopped in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from him despite the cold. "You're scared," he observed. "I have never fought in my life," I admitted. "I've never held a weapon. Never." "You ran from Gore's men with nothing but pepper powder and courage," he interrupted. "You survived 16 years in a house that wanted you dead. You are not weak, Dahlia. You were just never allowed to find your strength." The words hit me somewhere deep. Acheron took 2 wooden swords from the wall, handed one to me and kept the other. "First lesson," he said. "Attack me." "What?" "Attack me." I hesitated. He was twice my size, a warrior trained from birth. I didn't stand a chance. But there was something in his gaze, a challenge, an expectation. I lunged. He deflected my clumsy strike as if I were moving in slow motion. And then, before I could react, he disarmed me. The wooden sword flew from my hand and landed in the snow 10 feet away. "Again," he said. I retrieved the sword. Attacked. Was disarmed. Again. Attacked. Disarmed. The frustration began to build in my chest, a warm pressure I didn't recognize, something that felt bigger than me, bigger than my body could contain. "You're thinking too much," Acheron said after my 10th failed attempt. "Stop calculating. Stop analyzing. Just feel." "I don't know how to do that," I screamed, the frustration exploding. And then something else exploded too. I didn't see it happen. I just felt it. A wave of force pouring out of me, invisible but real as the air in my lungs. And suddenly, Acheron was no longer in front of me. He was 6 feet away, sliding backward in the snow, his feet leaving deep grooves as he struggled to maintain balance. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at my hands. They were trembling. And on my wrists, beneath the skin, I could see veins glowing with a silver light that shouldn't exist. What? My voice failed. What was that? Acheron straightened, and when he looked at me, I saw something on his face that took my breath away. Pride. That, he said, walking back toward me with slow, deliberate steps, was your wolf. I didn't transform. You don't need to transform to use her power. He stopped in front of me, his eyes shining with renewed intensity. You are an omni, Dahlia, one of the rare she-wolves born with pure, undiluted power. You don't need fangs or claws to be lethal. Omni? I repeated. The word was strange on my tongue. Your mother was likely one, Acheron continued. That's why your father kept her contained. That's why he poisoned you when she died. A free Omni is too dangerous for men like him. My head was spinning. My mother. Omni. Pure power. I pushed you, I said slowly, the realization forming. With my mind. Without touching you. You pushed, he confirmed. And that was only a fraction of what you can do. Before I could answer, he was moving again. His wooden sword sliced through the air toward my head, too fast for me to dodge. But I didn't need to dodge. My body reacted before my mind. That force burst out of me again, an invisible wall that blocked his strike inches from my face. The sword hit something solid, the impact reverberating across the courtyard. Acheron smiled. It wasn't the half-smile I had seen before. It was a real smile, predatory and proud and terrifyingly beautiful. There she is, he said, his voice husky with something that sounded like admiration. The Omni Queen. The following days blurred into a haze of training and discovery. In the mornings, I practiced with swords, learning to use my body as a weapon. Acheron was a relentless teacher, never going easy, never sparing me the bruises and falls that were part of learning. But he was also patient in ways I hadn't expected, explaining every move, correcting every mistake, picking me up every time I fell. In the afternoons, I practiced with my mind. I discovered I could move objects without touching them. Not just push, but pull, lift, rotate. I discovered I could feel the emotions of others if I concentrated. Waves of fear or anger or lust that weren't mine. I discovered that my eyes, when I used the power, glowed silver, turning my irises into mirrors that reflected the world back. And I discovered that the closer I was to Acheron, the stronger my power became. It's the bond, he explained one night, as we dined in his quarters. Soulmates amplify one another. My control gives you focus. Your strength gives me... He paused, searching for the word. What? I asked, curious. Peace, he finally said, his eyes meeting mine. For the first time in 3 decades, my wolf isn't constantly struggling to break free. You calm him. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. Instead, I reached across the table and touched his fingers. Sparks of silver light danced where our skin met, and when he turned his hand to intertwine his fingers with mine, when those molten gold eyes looked at me with something that went far beyond desire, I finally understood what my mother meant when she sang about wolves dancing beneath the moon. She wasn't singing about transformation. She was singing about this. About finding the person whose fire complemented yours, whose silence was as comfortable as words, whose touch made you feel whole for the first time in your life. The solstice is in 3 days, Acheron said softly, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. Are you ready? I thought of my father counting the gold coins. I thought of my sisters laughing while I was dragged through the mud. I thought of Kieran promising to make me pay in bed. And I thought of who I was now. Healed, strong, powerful, an Omni, a queen. Yes, I said, and my voice didn't tremble. I am ready. The gown arrived on the morning of the solstice. 3 servants brought it in as if it were a sacred relic, their arms outstretched, their steps synchronized. And when they unfolded it before me, I forgot how to breathe. It wasn't like the garish dresses my sisters wore, those explosions of pink and yellow that screamed for attention. This was something completely different. Quiet, deadly, beautiful. The base was pure white silk, so light it seemed to float, but over it, covering every inch like a second skin, was chainmail, not the crude iron worn by common soldiers. This was mithril, the legendary metal worth its weight in diamonds, woven into rings so fine they resembled liquid silver lace. When the light from the window touched the gown, it shone like 1,000 stars captured in human form. "It is tradition," one of the servants explained, her voice reverent. "The Queen of Wolves wears armor even in times of peace, to remind everyone that beauty and strength are not opposites." I ran my fingers over the mail. It was cold to the touch, but flexible, moving like water beneath my hands. The cloak came next. Ice blue velvet lined with white fox fur, so soft it felt like sin. When they pinned it to my shoulders, its weight made me feel anchored. Royal. Next came the jewels. A silver necklace that ended in a sapphire crescent moon, earrings that chimed softly with every movement, and finally, so delicately I barely felt it, a crown. It wasn't the crown I had imagined, heavy and ostentatious. It was a simple silver band with 3 points, each ending in a small crystal that captured the light and returned it in rainbows. When they were finished, when they left me alone to look at myself in the full-length mirror, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. The skin that had been pale and grayish was now translucent porcelain. The hair that had been dull and lifeless now fell in reddish-brown waves that shone like polished copper. And the eyes, those forest green eyes that had always looked so lusterless, were now vivid, alive, and when I blinked, for a fraction of a second they flashed silver. "You are radiant." I turned. Acheron was standing in the doorway, and the sight of him almost made me forget how to walk. He wore his full armor, those black plates etched with golden runes that pulsed softly. The wolf-hide cloak rested on his shoulders like a proclamation of power, and on his head, a crown of black iron with sharp points that looked like they could cut reality. But it was the eyes that held me, those molten gold eyes that looked at me as if I were the only thing in the universe worth seeing. "You are beautiful," he said, and there was something in his voice, a reverence I didn't deserve. "I'm scared," I admitted. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and took my hands in his. "Good," he said. "Fear means you understand the importance of the moment. But remember, Dahlia, you are no longer the girl who scrubbed floors. You are the woman who can move mountains with her mind. You are my queen. And today, you will show everyone exactly what that means." He lifted my gloved hand and pressed his lips to my fingers. "And I will be at your side. Always." The Hall of Kings was a cavern of opulence. Iron chandeliers with 1,000 candles hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting golden light upon tables laden with food that could feed an entire village for a month. Roast venison, swans in aspic, towers of crystallized fruit, 100-year-old wines in crystal goblets, and everywhere, wolves. Pack lords and their mates, dressed in their finest silks and velvets. Warriors in polished armor. Scribes and alchemists and advisors. Hundreds of them, perhaps 1,000. All gathered for the most important event of the wolf calendar, the winter solstice, the day the Iron King would present his queen. I watched them from the side door where Acheron and I waited for the announcement. My eyes scanned the crowd automatically, searching for faces I knew, and I found them. A low table, near the back of the hall, exactly where minor nobles were placed, those whose status was too dubious to merit better accommodation. Sigmund was there, his face still red and swollen, his oily hair plastered to his forehead. He ate like a pig, greasy hands tearing chunks of meat directly from the bone, his mouth open as he chewed. Samara and Lyrael were beside him, dressed in those horrible shades of shocking pink and garish yellow that made them look like rotting fruit. They laughed too loudly, drank too fast, desperately trying to catch the attention of nobles who didn't even look their way. And there, 3 tables over, was Kieran Gore. He had changed since I last saw him. The nose Acheron had broken was crooked now, healed incorrectly, and there was something in his eyes, a light of barely contained madness, that hadn't been there before. Our eyes met across the hall, and he smiled. It was a smile that promised pain. That said he hadn't forgotten the pepper powder, or the humiliation, or the imprisonment, that he was just waiting for the right opportunity. "Are you all right?" Acheron asked softly beside me. I took a deep breath. Yes. The trumpets sounded. The sound reverberated through the hall, so loud it made the wine glasses tremble. All conversations ceased. Every head turned toward the double black oak doors at the end of the hall, the doors that opened slowly, revealing us. "I present," the herald shouted, his voice trained to be heard by 1,000 people. "His Majesty, Acheron Draven, Iron King, Supreme Alpha of the North." Acheron took the first step. I followed him, my hand resting lightly on his arm. "And I present," the herald continued, and I could hear the astonishment in his voice, because this was history being made live. Her Majesty, Dahlia of Silver, Omni of the Realm, Queen of Wolves. The silence that followed was deafening. 1,000 pairs of eyes fixed on me, 1,000 mouths agape in shock, 1,000 minds trying to process the impossible. Dahlia, the servant, the nobody, Queen. I forced my spine straight. I forced my chin up. I forced my eyes to look forward instead of down, to the floor where I had spent 16 years on my knees, and I walked. Each step made the chainmail chime softly. Each step brought me closer to the high table, to the silver throne that had been placed beside Acheron's iron throne. Each step transformed me from memory into reality. I didn't look at my father. Not yet. But I could feel the shock emanating from him like heat waves. I could feel the confusion of my sisters, the anger of Kieran, the disbelief of everyone who had known me before. Acheron guided me to the throne. He waited until I sat down, the mithril gown settling around me like silver water. And then, and only then, did he sit beside me, and the feast began. Food was served, wine was poured, conversations resumed, still whispered, still shocked, but they resumed, and I waited. It took less time than I expected. Sigmund had never been known for his patience or tact, especially when wine was involved. I saw him rise from the low table, swaying slightly, his goblet still in hand. I saw the people around him try to make him sit down again, urgent whispers of, "Don't do it," and "You're drunk," but he ignored them, and he started walking toward the high table. Guards moved to intercept him, but Acheron raised a hand. A simple gesture, a silent order. Let him come. Sigmund climbed the 3 steps leading to the dais where the throne sat, and when he stopped in front of me, so close I could smell the sour wine on his breath, he smiled. "My daughter," he declared loud enough for half the hall to hear. "My precious Dahlia, I knew you would rise in life. I always knew there was greatness in you." He opened his arms as if to embrace me, and I stood up. The movement was fluid, thanks to the weeks of training with Acheron. And when I stood, when I looked down at the man who had sold me, I saw something in his eyes that gave me dark satisfaction. Fear. He was beginning to understand that he had made a mistake. "Don't touch me," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but there was something in it, some quality that carried across the hall as if I had screamed. Conversations died. Forks stopped in midair. "Don't touch me with the hands that counted the money from my sale," I continued, every word crystal clear. "With the hands that poisoned me since childhood to keep me weak. With the hands that signed my death sentence without a second thought." Sigmund's face went from red to white in seconds. "Dahlia, I didn't. You don't understand. It was for your own good." "For my own good?" I repeated, and something inside me began to boil. "You poisoned me. You kept me as a slave. You sold me like cattle. All for my own good. I was your father. I had the right. You lost the right to call me daughter," I said, my voice finally rising, finally letting decades of rage leak out. "The day you sold your dead mate's daughter to pay your gambling debts." The silence was now absolute. "Your mother," Sigmund stammered, attempting one last desperate defense. "Your mother would have understood. She knew an Omni needed to be controlled, that you were too dangerous to—" "My mother," I interrupted, "loved me, protected me, and you killed her for it." It wasn't true. At least I wasn't sure if it was. My mother had died of fever. At least that's what they told me. But the way Sigmund's face lost all color, the way his eyes widened, the way he recoiled a step, told me everything I needed to know. I had struck closer to the truth than I expected. A sudden movement drew my attention. Kieran had stood up, and there was something in his hand, something that gleamed in the candlelight. A dagger. "She is mine," he roared, his voice tearing the silence. "I paid for her. I bought her legally. No sacred bond can overturn the law of ownership." He took a step toward me, the dagger raised. Guards moved. Acheron stood, a growl starting in his chest. But I was faster. Not with my body, with my mind. The thing inside me, the wolf that had slept for 16 years beneath layers of poison, finally exploded. My eyes didn't flash silver. They became silver. Irises and pupils vanished, replaced by liquid mirrors that reflected the entire hall back. And I opened my mouth. The sound that came out wasn't entirely mine. It was my voice, yes, but overlaid with something deeper, older, more powerful. The voice of the wolf. The voice of the Omni. The voice of the Queen. Knees. The word exploded from me like a physical shockwave, and every wolf in the hall fell. They didn't bow. They didn't kneel gracefully. They were forced, as if invisible giant hands had grabbed them and slammed them to the floor. Knees hit stone with crashes that echoed like thunder. Lords and ladies, warriors and servants, ancient nobles and young recruits. They all fell. All except one. Acheron remained standing beside me, immune to my command, because he was my equal. My alpha just as I was his Omni. But Kieran tried to resist. I watched him struggling, the muscles in his neck bulging, the veins standing out on his forehead, his teeth grinding with the effort to remain upright, the dagger still in his hand, trembling violently. And then I heard it, the sound of bones snapping. Kieran screamed. The dagger fell from his hands as he finally, inevitably, crashed to his knees on the floor. His bones, unable to withstand the dual force of my will and his resistance, had simply given way, cracked, broken, and through it all, I remained standing, looking down upon a hall of 1,000 kneeling wolves, looking at my father, whose arrogance had finally transformed into true terror, looking at my sisters, who wept tears of smudged mascara, looking at Kieran, who groaned in pain on the floor, and for the first time in 22 years, I wasn't on my knees. They were. The power inside me didn't want to stop. Now that it had tasted freedom, now that it had finally awakened after 16 years of chemical imprisonment, it demanded more. It demanded blood. It demanded revenge. It demanded that I crush everyone who had hurt me until nothing was left but dust. And the scariest part was that I wanted to let it. Dahlia. Acheron's voice cut through the red haze descending over my vision. Not aloud. Through the bond. That golden connection that linked us soul to soul. I know you want to make them pay. And they will pay. But not like this. Not by you losing control and becoming the monster they always said you were. His words anchored me. I took a deep breath, feeling the power slowly recede, like a tide drawing back from the shore. The silver mirrors that were my eyes began to dissolve, forest green bleeding back to the edges. But I didn't release them from the command. 1,000 wolves still remained on their knees, heads bowed, awaiting my judgment. I descended the 3 steps of the dais, the chainmail chiming softly with every movement. My bare feet touched the cold stone of the hall, and I walked until I stopped in front of Kieran. He was still groaning in pain, his hands clutching his broken legs. When my shadow fell over him, he looked up, and what I saw there was no longer arrogance or hunger. It was pure terror. "You said I was your property," I spoke softly, "that no sacred bond could overturn the law. Your Majesty," he stammered, using the title for the first time. "Please, I didn't know. If I had known who you were, if you had known, would you have treated me differently?" I asked, tilting my head. "Or would you just have charged more?" Silence. "I have considered," I said. "Kieran Gore, for trafficking slaves in royal territory, for threatening the Queen with a lethal weapon, and for the audacity of believing any living being can be owned by another. I condemn you." He paled further. "Death?" "No," I replied, and I saw confusion cross his face. "Death would be mercy, and you do not deserve my mercy." I made a gesture and guards approached. "You will work," I said simply, "in the northern salt mines. No shifting privileges, no contact with your pack, nothing but labor and silence for the rest of your natural life. And every morning, when you wake up aching with pains that never stop, I want you to remember the girl in the cage, and be grateful that I am kinder than you ever were." The guards dragged him away, his cries of protest echoing through the hall. Then I turned toward my father. Sigmund was still on his knees, but there was something different in his posture now. He didn't try to stand. He didn't try to argue. He just waited, his face gray as ash. He knew. "Lord Sigmund Vance," I began, my voice carrying through the silent hall. "You poisoned your own daughter for 16 years, sold her to pay gambling and drinking debts. And by your expression when I mentioned my mother, I suspect there are even greater crimes waiting to be uncovered." "I didn't kill her," he said quickly. "The fever. You gave her the fever?" I asked, and the way he looked away gave me the answer. "Aconite in high doses causes fever. Did you know that? Dahlia, please." "You will live," I said, cutting off his pleas. "But not as a lord. Your titles are revoked, your lands confiscated, and you, along with your 2 daughters who laughed while I was sold, will work." "Work?" Samara shrieked from her kneeling position, her voice high with panic. "We are ladies. We can't." "You will clean," I said, looking at my sisters for the first time. "You will scrub floors on your knees until your hands bleed as mine bled. You will wash clothes in icy water until your fingers crack as mine cracked. You will serve meals you cannot eat and warm rooms where you cannot sleep." Lyriel sobbed, her makeup running down her face in black streams. "You will do everything you forced me to do," I continued, "in the stables, tending to the nightmares. And every time you think of complaining, of protesting that this is unfair, you will remember that I did that work for 16 years. And I survived. The question is, can you?" Guard came for them too. Sigmund went in silence, finally broken. Samara and Lyriel cried loudly, begging for mercy I had none to give. And when they disappeared, when the hall doors closed behind them, something inside me finally calmed. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was something deeper. Conclusion. I turned back to the hall of kneeling wolves. "Rise," I commanded, and this time my voice was only mine. Human. Tired. 1,000 bodies rose as one, the sound of clothes rustling and armor clanking filling the air. And then, slowly, beginning with the youngest and spreading like waves through the crowd, they began to strike. Not polite applause. Fists hitting chests. The sound of 1,000 wolves showing respect in the only way that mattered. Recognition. Acceptance. Loyalty. I climbed the steps back to the dais, my legs suddenly heavy, exhaustion hitting like a wave. Acheron was there, his hand extended, and when I took it, when I let him pull me close, I finally let the tears fall. Not tears of sadness, tears of relief. "It's over," I whispered against his chest. "No," he said gently, his lips touching my hair. "It has just begun." The transformation happened 3 days later. It wasn't planned. It wasn't controlled. It simply happened. I was in the quarters I now shared with Acheron, practicing sword movements he had taught me, when I felt the change begin. It wasn't pain, as I expected. It was more like surrender, like finally stopping the fight against something that had always been a part of me. Bones rearranged, skin morphed into fur, and suddenly I was falling forward, my hands becoming paws before they hit the floor. When the transformation finished, when I finally managed to open my eyes, the world had changed. Colors were more vivid, sounds were sharper, and I could feel everything. Every vibration in the air, every movement on the floor below, every heartbeat in the entire building. Acheron was on his knees in front of me, his eyes wide. "Dahlia," he breathed. I looked down, trying to see my body. Massive paws, the size of dinner plates, fur that shone pure white, like fresh snow under moonlight. And when I moved toward a full-length mirror in the corner of the room, I finally understood why he was looking like that. I was giant, 10 feet tall in wolf form, maybe more. Bigger than any wolf I had seen. Bigger even than Acheron's form. And the eyes staring back at me from the mirror were not green. They were liquid silver. Perfect mirrors that reflected the world. "The Omni-Wolf," Acheron said behind me. "The first in 3 generations." I turned toward him, and some instinct I didn't know I had guided me. I placed my massive paw on his chest, gently, feeling his heart pound beneath my pad, and he laughed. It was a sound of pure joy, free and unrestrained in ways I had never heard from him. "Perfect," he said. "You are absolutely perfect." The shift back was easier. A thought, a desire, and I was human again, naked on the cold floor, trembling slightly. Acheron immediately wrapped his cloak around me, pulling me against the warmth of his body. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Whole," I replied. For the first time, whole. And when he kissed me, when his lips met mine with a tenderness that contradicted all his ferocity, I knew it was true. I was no longer the sold servant. I was no longer the poisoned daughter. I was no longer the girl on her knees scrubbing stone floors. I was Dahlia of Silver, Omni of the Realm, Queen of Wolves, and I was home. The formal coronation happened beneath the Aurora Borealis. They took me to the highest balcony of the citadel, where the sky exploded in curtains of green and purple and blue that danced like ancient spirits. Acheron stood at my side, his hand laced in mine. Below us, the entire city stretched out, 1,000 lights blinking in the darkness. Our kingdom, our people, our responsibility. "You rule the wolves," Acheron said softly, lifting my hand to his lips. "You command them with power that comes from blood and spirit." He pressed a kiss into the palm of my hand, right where calluses used to be. "And I rule the steel that protects them," he continued, "the iron that keeps the borders secure." Another kiss, this time on my wrist, where the silver veins glowed softly beneath my skin. "Together," he said, his eyes meeting mine, that molten gold reflecting the aurora above. "Together, we are unbreakable." "Together," I repeated, the word a promise. And when he kissed me beneath the dancing northern lights, when 1,000 wolves howled below us in celebration, when I felt the bond between us pulse with a strength that could move mountains, I knew. My story had not begun in a cage. It had begun the moment I decided to break free of it. And this story of ash turned to crown, of poison turned to power, of knees turned to throne, was only the beginning. The rest was yet to be written, and I couldn't wait. Thank you for being here and for joining me for another story. I truly hope you enjoyed it. If you want, leave your comment. I love reading what you feel and think after each episode. Thank you for the love, and see you in the next story.